In a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy, recent cuts to funding for organizations advocating for democracy and human rights have raised alarms among activists and observers. These changes, driven by a government efficiency initiative led by Elon Musk, are seen as a victory for the Chinese government, which has long criticized U.S. support for dissenting voices within its borders. Reports indicate that the National Endowment for Democracy (NED), a key supporter of various non-profit groups monitoring human rights abuses in China, has suspended funding, leaving many of these organizations in a precarious position. Non-profits that track the imprisonment of political dissidents, advocate for persecuted minorities, and raise awareness about Beijing's crackdown on freedoms in Hong Kong have all been affected. The NED, established during the Reagan administration to promote democracy globally, had been a vital source of funding for these groups, which include organizations like China Digital Times and the World Uyghur Congress. The funding freeze comes at a time when the need for such advocacy has never been more critical, with President Xi Jinping intensifying his government's repressive measures against civil society since taking office in 2012. Xiao Chang, founder of China Digital Times, expressed the gravity of the situation, noting that the operational disruptions caused by the funding suspension have resulted in staff pay cuts and reduced work hours. He stated, "We are facing significant financial challenges that threaten our ability to continue our work." Similarly, representatives from the World Uyghur Congress highlighted the detrimental timing of the cuts, as their advocacy efforts are increasingly overshadowed by other global crises such as the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. These developments have not gone unnoticed in China, where nationalist commentators have hailed the U.S. funding cuts as a strategic win. Hu Xijin, a prominent Chinese journalist, expressed his approval, hoping that the funding freeze would be long-term. This sentiment was echoed by scholars in China, who argue that the reduction of U.S. foreign aid reflects a retreat from global engagement and undermines America's previous support for democracy abroad. The implications of this funding halt extend beyond immediate financial concerns. They represent a broader trend in U.S. foreign policy that appears to pivot away from supporting human rights initiatives. Activists had initially found hope in the appointment of leaders with hardline views on China under the current administration, but the abrupt funding cuts have left many disillusioned. Zumrate Arkan, vice president of the World Uyghur Congress, expressed shock at the rapid changes in U.S. policy, stating, "We are shocked by how rapidly things have changed in not even a month. The lack of funding is particularly troubling given the heightened risks faced by activists under Xi's regime, where dissent is met with severe repercussions." Li Chang, founder of China Labor Watch, compared Musk's online mobilization tactics against groups like the NED to the political crackdowns that have historically plagued China. He warned that such approaches could lead to chaos reminiscent of past turmoil in China, resulting in significant human rights violations. As the situation unfolds, the future of advocacy for human rights in China remains uncertain. The cessation of funding from the NED raises critical questions about the sustainability of these organizations and their ability to operate in an increasingly hostile environment. The geopolitical landscape is shifting, and as the U.S. re-evaluates its foreign policy priorities, the impact on civil society in China will likely be profound. Looking ahead, observers will be watching closely to see how the U.S. government responds to these challenges and whether it will reinstate support for democracy and human rights initiatives. The choices made in the coming months will not only affect the organizations operating within China but also shape the broader narrative of U.S. engagement in global human rights advocacy. As trade tensions escalate between the United States and China, the repercussions are reverberating across the global economy with far-reaching implications for various industries. The recent imposition of tariffs by the U.S. administration has sparked a retaliatory response from China, igniting what many are calling Trade War 2.0. This renewed conflict is not just a bilateral issue, it threatens to disrupt trade dynamics worldwide, affecting economies large and small. The U.S. has implemented a 10% tariff on a wide range of Chinese goods, prompting China to retaliate with a 14% tariff on selected U.S. imports. This tit-for-tat strategy is reminiscent of earlier trade disputes, but experts warn that the current environment is marked by a more aggressive posture. Joseph Brusuelas, a leading economist, observes that this escalation is not merely about tariffs but reflects a broader trend towards mercantilism, where nations prioritize accumulating wealth through favorable trade balances at the expense of free trade principles. The global economy is in a state of flux, Brusuelas notes. We are witnessing a movement toward protectionism that threatens to unravel decades of progress in international trade. He highlights that the U.S. economy is currently growing at a faster pace than China's, which has been struggling with a protracted deleveraging process. This disparity in growth rates is expected to contribute to a depreciation of the yuan, potentially pushing it to 8 per dollar, exacerbating the tensions further. In addition to tariffs, currency manipulation is emerging as a critical issue in this trade conflict. The implications of a weaker yuan could have significant consequences for U.S. consumers, as the anticipated inflationary pressures may lead to increased prices for a variety of goods, from automobiles to household appliances. This in turn complicates monetary policy for the Federal Reserve, which may find it challenging to lower interest rates in an inflationary environment. The ramifications of these developments extend beyond the U.S. and China. Countries like Thailand are already feeling the impact of rising trade barriers. Experts in Thailand are urging the government to adopt strategies to mitigate potential disruptions. Association Professor Sampap Manarungsan points out that as nations increasingly seek to reduce their reliance on U.S. markets, there is a growing trend toward strengthening regional cooperation. Countries like Canada and the EU are already aligning against U.S. tariff policies, and Thailand must consider similar strategies, he suggests. The Thai government is advised to establish measures that cushion local businesses from global shocks while actively seeking new trade partnerships. This shift in focus is essential given that Thailand is not directly affected by U.S. tariffs in the same way as other nations. However, the potential for increased competition and market volatility remains a significant concern. As the dust settles from the initial rounds of tariffs, it becomes clear that this conflict may usher in a reconfiguration of global trade relationships. The traditional reliance on the U.S. dollar as the primary currency for international transactions may come under scrutiny, particularly if countries begin exploring alternatives to mitigate risks associated with U.S. policies. In the chemical industry, for example, the fallout from tariffs is already evident. The imposition of tariffs on chemicals and raw materials has led to increased costs and disrupted supply chains, prompting companies to re-evaluate their sourcing strategies. As firms navigate this new landscape, they must adapt swiftly to maintain competitiveness. Looking ahead, the potential for a prolonged trade war raises concerns about a global economic recession reminiscent of the 1930s. The interconnected nature of modern economies means that the repercussions of U.S.-China tensions will likely extend far beyond their borders, affecting nations across Asia, Europe, and beyond. In conclusion, as the U.S. and China engage in this complex dance of tariffs and trade barriers, the broader repercussions for the global economy will depend on how countries respond. The current landscape calls for strategic adaptation, regional cooperation, and a re-evaluation of traditional trade frameworks. The future of international trade may hinge on nations' ability to navigate these turbulent waters while seeking mutually beneficial arrangements that uphold the principles of free trade. Tensions in the Indo-Pacific region are escalating as reports emerge regarding the increasingly aggressive tactics employed by China's military aircraft. Recent incidents involving Australian P-8A surveillance planes highlight a concerning trend of dangerous maneuvers aimed at deterring foreign aircraft. These maneuvers reportedly include the use of flares and chaff, which can pose serious risks to aviation safety, raising alarms among U.S. allies. The Australian Department of Defence has documented multiple encounters where Chinese fighter jets engaged in provocative actions such as deploying flares and chaff to disrupt the operations of surveillance aircraft. These tactics not only jeopardize the safety of our pilots but also threaten the stability of the broader region. stated an Australian defence spokesperson. Such incidents reflect a growing pattern of assertiveness from China that calls into question the safety of international airspace. This escalation comes amid a backdrop of heightened military activities in the region, with the U.S. conducting joint patrols with the Philippines in areas often contested by China. The Philippines has become increasingly aligned with U.S. military strategies, particularly in response to China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. The recent deployment of the Typhoon mid-range missile system by the U.S. in the Philippines has further inflamed tensions, with Chinese officials denouncing the move as a provocative act. China's Defense Ministry spokesperson Zheng Xiaojiang criticized the U.S. and the Philippines, claiming that such military posturing is detrimental to peace and stability in the region. He emphasized that China maintains a defensive military strategy but warned that it will take necessary actions to protect its sovereignty. "Our military is a staunch force for peace," he asserted, countering accusations of aggression. The ongoing military exchanges between the U.S. and its allies serve to reinforce a coalition aimed at countering perceived threats from China. The response from the Chinese government underscores a significant shift in the regional security landscape, where major powers are increasingly positioned against one another. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has made clear the administration's commitment to deter aggressive actions in the Indo-Pacific, a stance that is likely to provoke further reactions from China. The complexity of these interactions raises concerns about the potential for miscalculations that could lead to conflict. As tensions continue to rise, the future of military engagements in the Indo-Pacific remains uncertain. Analysts suggest that the aggressive posturing from both sides could lead to a cycle of escalation that complicates diplomatic efforts. The international community is watching closely, as the actions taken by both the U.S. and China will likely shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. With military maneuvers becoming increasingly provocative, the need for clear communication and conflict de-escalation measures has never been more critical. In conclusion, this situation in the Indo-Pacific highlights the precarious balance of power and the potential for conflict. As military strategies evolve, the implications for regional security will be profound, necessitating a concerted effort from all parties to pursue dialogue and cooperation to avoid crossing into dangerous territory. The coming months will be pivotal in determining whether diplomatic solutions can prevail over military confrontations in this vital region.